Hello, everybody. Welcome to NASTA's COVID-19 vaccination town hall today. We're so excited to have you all here. There has been so much excitement about today's event, and there's so much demand on this information that we feel very proud to be able to offer a space for you to learn and communicate and discuss this very important topic. Bienvenidos todos, estamos muy felices de tenerlos a todos aquí. Este evento, esta asamblea es muy importante, es un tema que todos queremos hablar. Vamos a poder darles un espacio para que aprendan, para que puedan hablar y para que puedan discutir todas las cosas relacionadas con la vacuna del COVID. So let's jump right in. Vamos a comenzar. Next, Stephanie. So just a little housekeeping before we get started. This meeting is being recorded. Your microphones have been muted. When we open the session for the questions, you can mute yourself, or you're gonna mute yourself to ask the questions. We will go over logistics shortly. So on your control panel, you'll be able to find the unmute. On your control panel, you'll be able to find the sound button where you can mute, unmute, and select your audio source. The chat box to communicate with us and other attendees, both publicly and privately. If you need any help with the technology or interpretation options, please use the chat box to contact Shay Martinez. For questions, please privately chat Shay as well. The last icon on the right are the reactions, which you can use to agree with what is being said. Next to the reaction icon, there is a world icon with the word interpretation. Everybody, please take a few seconds to click on that button and select your language between Spanish and English. Also, select mute original audio. Once you do that, you'll hear all future audio in your preferred language. We have our interpreter here today, Jessica Ramirez. We'll wait a few seconds to allow everybody to choose their preferred language. Vamos a describir unas cosas básicas sobre el Zoom antes de empezar. Esta reunión está siendo grabada y está siendo puesta en Facebook Live. Sus micrófonos se han silenciado, pero una vez estemos en la sección de preguntas, podrá activar el sonido para hablar y hacer sus preguntas. Hablaremos de estas logísticas en unos minutos. En su panel de control encontrarán el botón de sonido donde pueden silenciar, reactivar y seleccionar su fuente de audio. La caja de chat para comunicarse con nosotros y otros asistentes, tanto de forma pública como privada. Si necesita ayuda con la tecnología o las opciones de interpretación, use el chat para comunicarse con Shay Marínez. El último icono a la derecha son las reacciones. Se pueden utilizar de acuerdo para celebrar lo que se está diciendo. Junto al icono de reacciones hay un icono de un planeta con la palabra interpretación. Le pedimos a todos que hagan clic en ese botón y seleccionen su idioma de preferencia, entre español e inglés. También seleccione silenciar el audio original. Una vez que lo haga, escucharán todo el audio de la reunión en su idioma de preferencia. Hoy tenemos a nuestra intérprete Jessica Ramírez haciendo la interpretación simultánea. Esperaremos unos segundos para que todos puedan elegir su idioma de preferencia. Okay. Assuming that everybody is in English, asumiendo que ya todos están en español, continuaremos entonces con inglés en lo original y con Jessica en la parte de español. So now that everybody should have selected their language, we will continue now in English and original audio and on Spanish if you choose to go under interpreters. Next. So before we get started, we want to make sure everybody knows a few tips to work with the interpreters. Please speak at a moderate pace. Try not to speak too fast so that allows time for Jessica to interpret in a correct manner. If it's possible, use short sentences. During the open town hall questions, let us know what language you will be speaking before you ask your question or your comment. For example, you can say, English, Joanna, from New Jersey. My question is, etc. Okay? Let the host know if you have any difficulty hearing or understanding the interpreter. Again, Shay Martinez will be your best contact through the chat during this town hall. Next.
Great, so let's get started. Hi everyone, by the way, partners, promotoras, everyone. Welcome to today's town hall. We are super excited to be here today and to have you all here. So just a couple things, just to go over our agenda and what we're gonna do today. We're gonna get started with a few poll questions. Then we're gonna have a quick activity before we get into our presentation for today by our guest speaker, Dr. Joshua Josephs, which we'll present him later on. And then we're gonna jump into our town hall Q&A session, which, as Joanna stated, it's the part that everyone has been the most excited about. So we are happy to be here today. Welcome. And the goal of today's town hall is essentially to give everyone an opportunity, all our core partners, your affiliates, promotoras, community advisory boards, community members, and Proceed staff that is here today, a space, an open space where we can have a discussion about the COVID-19 vaccines, your questions. We want to make sure that we increase everyone's understanding of the science behind the actual vaccine and address any fears and go over and debunk any myths. We know that these are things that you are all experiencing in the community right now when you're working directly with the community. So we want to be able to have this expert here today to answer all of your questions. So before getting started, we just want to know where everybody's coming from. You're going to see a couple of questions pop up on your screen. Oh, Joanna, it's actually saying, can you launch the poll? It's not giving me access. But we have a few questions. We just want to know where you are all coming from, just your general level of understanding on today's topic. We're going to ask you a question about vaccine access in each one of your states, since you are all coming from different locations, and your level of readiness and plans for getting vaccinated. So we are going to launch the poll in a moment.
I apologize. I'm having some issues with the poll as well. It's not working.
Just launched.
So in the meantime, what we can do is answer the first poll question. We want to know, you can use the chat for this. We want to know where you are located in the United States. Are you in the East, South, Midwest, West, or Caribbean?
Maybe you can chat it in the meantime.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So where are you in the map? Where are you coming from in the US today? Okay. Thank you. All right, we got some responses coming in. Central, Midwest. We got Southwest. We are just crossing the whole map. Great. And for the second poll question, Joanna, can you?
Yes, so still not working. I'm gonna have to get out and come back, but I can, before I leave, ask the next poll question, which is, how would you rate your current level of understanding on today's topic? I don't know anything. Is it low, medium, high, or you're an expert?
So don't know anything, low, medium, high, or expert. What is your level of understanding on today's topic? Don't know anything, low, medium, high, or expert. All right. See the answers coming in. A lot of mediums. We're gonna hope to increase that to high or expert. as expert as our expert today.
So I'm back, and actually the polls are working now. So I'm going to launch very quickly the question we're just answering, because we want to make sure we have that for tracking. So how would you rate your current level of understanding of today's topic? Okay, we're going to allow just 3 more seconds. 3, 2, 1. Okay. So we have 73% of you have a medium understanding on today's topics, vaccines. 18% of you say low, and 9% say high. Okay, we're gonna go quickly on the other ones. The next one is, how is the access to vaccines in your state or area? Are there no vaccines available? Very few vaccines available. Appointments are hard to schedule. It's not so bad. We're getting there. Appointments are easy to find, or anyone who's wants a vaccine is able to get it, which is our goal in a couple of months, but maybe somebody in their community is already there. So we're gonna wait 5 more seconds. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Okay. All right, so 57% of you say that appointments are hard to schedule in your areas. 30% said there are few vaccines available. 9% said it's not so bad, we're getting there. And 4% said that appointments are easy to find. Great. And our last question, we want to know what your status on the vaccine is. So are you planning on getting vaccinated? Yes, I already vaccinated. Yes, as soon as I am able or there's availability for me, I'm ready to go. I'm not sure, but I'm probably yes, I will vaccinate. I'm not sure, probably not or not yet. Or no, I am not planning on doing it. So please make sure everybody answer this question. We're going to allow 5 seconds because we really want to know where you are. All right, 3, 2. I have a lot of responses coming in, so I'm gonna wait a second. Okay, so I'm gonna close. All right, so 39% of you are already vaccinated. The other 39% of you are ready to vaccinate as soon as you are able. We have 13% that are not sure, but probably yes. 4% that are sure, they're not sure, but probably not. And we have 4% saying, no, I'm not planning on vaccinated. So thank you, everybody. And continue, Steph.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Joanna. So before we get into our presentation and our town hall, we wanted to do this short activity. We just want to capture everybody's feelings around the vaccine. So we want to know if you can share one word to describe how you're feeling about the COVID vaccine. So you can text in your response. Text Proceed Inc. 505, as you see on the top of the screen, to 22333, or you can type in the link into your browser and respond through online. So we want to give you all a few seconds. Feel free to share as many feelings as you're feeling. If you have if you're feeling one thing or 7 different things, submit as many responses as you'd like. So we're going to give you a moment. You can text it in or type it into the browser. Daunted, we have the first one. Excited, anxious. And your responses are anonymous. So please, be as honest as you'd like about where you are in this process and this journey that we're all on. Anxious, excited, hopeful. Oh, somebody's drawing. Okay, getting creative. Confidence. Breathe. That is an interesting one. It's almost like a breath of hope, a breath of fresh air. A couple of exciteds. What we see and how this word cloud works is that the word that you see the largest is the one that you are all sharing. So most of you, it appears to be, are feeling a little bit anxious, but much more hopeful. And we're going to give you all just a few more seconds to share your thoughts and your feelings about the vaccine right now. Relief, protection.
So for those of you that are putting the words in the chat, I am adding it to the system. So if
perfect.
your
Great.
phone is not working, feel free to put it in the chat and I will add it.
Thank you. Thank you, Joanna. Beautiful. So thank you all. And I see the responses still coming in. I mean, and this is great to hear. I mean, it's a very rare occurrence for all of us in the entire world to be in the same, experiencing the same event and same or similar feelings. Some of us go through all of these feelings in the same day. So we just thank you for sharing your thoughts. Hopeful still seems to be the emotion that is winning in this process right now, which is great. And hopefully after today's town hall, you can feel even more hopeful and excited for the vaccine and the next steps to come. So let's move on to so I'd like to introduce you to our guest speaker for today. It is my personal pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Joshua Josephs. Dr. Joshua Josephs graduated from Emory University in Atlanta and completed his medicine residency at Montefiore Medical Center in New York. He is a board certified internist with a practice in academic hospital medicine in the internal medicine residency at Hackensack University Medical Center here in New Jersey. He also practices infectious disease epidemiology, which is all public health people's favorite subject. And he conducts healthcare services research on top of being a COVID-19 guru and public health activist, I like to say. So thank you, Dr. Josephs, for being here today. We are excited to hear from you. And yeah, I will pass it on to you to educate us a little bit more about the vaccine and just COVID in general.
Sure thing. Thank you very much for that kind introduction and those kind words. I don't know if guru is completely accurate, but I'll do my best here to try to give everybody some information about the COVID-19 vaccine and COVID-19 in general. If we could just go to the next slide, please. Before I do that, just a couple of housekeeping details. Number one, I'm here today representing myself, so please don't take what I say to be on behalf of HMH Network or the medical school or Hackensack University Medical Center. Also, just so everybody knows, I've no financial interest or stake relationship with any of the vaccine companies that are producing vaccine or the NIH, CDC, here solely as a private citizen today. If we could go to the next slide, please. So I just want to talk briefly about what COVID-19 is so that we're all on the same page. So the first piece of information to know is what is COVID-19. So it's actually a virus, belongs to a family called beta coronaviruses. And we first started to see it in humans in China November 2019. Primarily transmitted between humans through droplets in the air. That's to be distinguished from aerosol transmission, which is a much finer sort of mist or spray. There's some aerosol transmission, it's a minor component. As everybody I think knows, COVID-19 is now widely transmitted in the human population pretty much around the world. With the exception of Australia, where they've now successfully eliminated transmission of COVID-19. It's similar, but not identical to a number of other coronaviruses that have caused outbreaks in the past. That includes SARS, which was an outbreak in 2007, 2008, the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, which is currently ongoing, small number of cases, And then there are 4 coronaviruses that circulate in humans that do not cause severe disease in most people on an annual basis. And many of the people on this call, if we tested them, would test positive for those seasonal viruses. We can go to the next slide, please. So, in order to understand how COVID-19 works, it's necessary to understand how does the virus get into the cells of the body. So a virus is basically a big chunk of stuff with a coating on it. And the coating, you can think about it as if there was a caramel covered with chocolate. So inside the caramel is the good gooey stuff, and you have the chocolate coating. So you got to get the chocolate coating off. So how does that work? Well, picture as if the coating had nuts in it. So the nuts on the coating bind to receptors on the cells of the body, and they act like putting a key in a lock. They turn the lock. And when you turn the lock, the virus is then able to enter the cell of the body. And the name for the lock in the human body is called the ACE receptor. Stands for angiotensin converting enzyme. And the key, or the so-called nut on the surface of the virus, is called the S protein. And so when the S protein and the ACE inhibitor come together, yeah, thank you very much, right there, the virus is then able to enter the body. And there are drugs, this slide was taken from a drug company that's working on this, that are acting to try to block the virus from entering the cell. So we can go to the next slide. So once the virus is in the body, you have to have a mechanism to take the virus and make new copies of the virus. So for that to happen, let me just explain briefly how the body creates new copies of genetic material. So in the body is a code that is the structure of everything that is inside you. And that code is called DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid. And that code can be thought of as a language that, unlike English, which has 26 letters, DNA has 4 letters. It's a 4-lettered language. DNA is converted into what's called RNA. RNA also is a 4-letter language. And then RNA is converted into protein. And protein is what actually makes the structure of the body. So the body's skin, for example, is made up of hundreds of different types of proteins. And those are created through this process of going from DNA to RNA to protein. So the 2 vaccines on the market currently, which are made by Pfizer and Moderna, basically inject into the body an RNA and then take the body's machinery and use it to make new proteins. We can go to the next slide. So you can see that process here. On the right-hand side of the slide is a big clump of fat or lipid, which has been injected into the body. So that's what the vaccine is actually doing. It's injecting hundreds of these little lipid or fat particles into the body. The fat particles get taken up into the cells of the body, and the fat gets broken down and thrown away. The RNA that's inside that fat molecule, or that fat piece of fat, goes into a part of the cell called the ribosome, which is in the center of the slide here, and gets converted into a part of the virus. So it's not the whole virus. It's used to make a small piece of the virus called the spike protein. Once the spike protein has been made, the cell takes the spike protein and puts it in the blood, and your immune system says, I see something that doesn't belong, a foreign intruder. spike protein. That's not part of humans, and it activates the immune response. And your body makes a number of chemicals and proteins that attack the spike protein. That immune response, as your body is fighting off this spike protein, is why people have fevers and body aches after receiving the vaccine. You can go to the next slide, please. So, in order to deliver vaccine in the United States right now, we have two companies making vaccine. One is Pfizer, the other is Moderna. There is one other company that will be presenting data to the Food and Drug Administration probably next week. That's Johnson & Johnson for a third vaccine. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine uses a different type of delivery system than what I've just discussed. For the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, the vaccine has to be kept at either extremely cold or in the freezer temperatures. That's problematic because it has meant requiring vaccine sites to have freezers that store vaccine to -90 degrees, which can't be done in a regular freezer. The vaccine is delivered by injecting it into the muscle, typically of the arm, but it could be the leg or the buttocks. And as of January 20th of this year, 15 million doses had been administered to residents of the United States. The current number, as of today, or really yesterday, is approximately 32 million doses delivered. And of those, as of January 20th, 2.4 million people had received both doses. The vaccine requires 2 for complete immunity. And as of yesterday, about 6 million people had received both doses of the vaccine. We can go to the next slide, please. So this data is being updated daily, but just to give some sense of how much vaccine has been given at the sites that are part of this group, usually, or on average, for most states as of January 21st, it was about 5% of people had received at least one dose, and about 10% of the so-called prioritized population, which usually means people over 65, people living in long-term care facilities, and healthcare workers had been vaccinated. Oregon, interestingly, had a lot of success in its prioritized population. I'm not sure why they were more successful than others. These numbers have roughly doubled as of yesterday, approximately. You can go to the next slide, please. When the vaccine was being developed, there was a great deal of question about whether people would be willing to accept the vaccine because it seemed like the development had been rushed. It's important to note that the vaccine development actually took less time because of the amount of research that was involved, not because studying the vaccine was rushed. The vaccine development process took exactly the same amount of time as it would for any other vaccine, once we had a vaccine available. In some diseases, it is very hard to do the research to produce a vaccine. For those familiar with the HIV/AIDS pandemic, 40 years after detecting the virus, we still don't have a viable vaccine candidate. Fortunately, research done on SARS in 2007 made it possible to develop vaccine candidates very quickly. Once that happened, the same process as usual for producing a vaccine was followed, meaning to give the vaccine to large numbers of people and see if the vaccine was effective. Because of the process of producing the vaccine and the newness of the pandemic, surveys were done by a number of research groups, including the one I present here from the Pew Research Center, to see over time if vaccines towards accepting a if attitudes towards accepting a vaccine had changed over time and were different across different groups of people. So as you see here, we have data for the gender of participants. They've mixed race and ethnicity together, which I know can be problematic, but we'll take it for what it is. The age of individuals, their educational level, their political affiliation, and their income. So I think for the purposes of this call, what we should focus on is the middle box on that top line, where you see that currently for Hispanic individuals, as of November of last year, approximately 60% of them were willing to accept the vaccine. People who identified as Asian had the highest acceptance, about 83%, and African Americans had the lowest at 42%. Another call could discuss the reasons, which are many, for the varied willingness to accept vaccine. What I will say is that these numbers roughly match what we see for other vaccines that are commonly used, such as that against measles, mumps, and rubella, or polio virus. We can go to the next slide, please. So the important thing to know is that although only 60% of people roughly were willing to take a vaccine, it is possible to change people's minds and convince them that they would, that they should get vaccinated. So this is just some more data from the same research group. 39% of people said they would not get the vaccine. 61% said they would. So if you take apart the people who said they would not get the vaccine, if you ask them what would help get you to take the vaccine, 46% of them say that they need more information. And 53% say they've made up their mind. So, of course, the people to target are those who say that more information or more knowledge would change their opinion. Now, of course, more knowledge is not going to convert all of those people to saying yes, but certainly it would convert a good percentage of them, I think. For those who are pretty certain they would not get the vaccine, we need to do more research to understand why it is that they are so convinced against taking the vaccine. And some of that is long-held opinions about vaccines in general. Some of that is opinions about COVID vaccine in particular. We can go to the next slide, please. So I will try to be as accurate as possible with my terminology here. The data sources for some of this are a little confusing because although for several years now, the federal government has asked people when conducting research to please separate race and ethnicity data into two separate questions. That's not always done as well as it could be. Also, just because of my own training, I am conditioned to use the word Hispanic. I know that's not always considered to be the most best identifier for this community, but that's the one that's stuck in my head, so I'm going to use it to keep my own brain straight. So let's talk about historically what's gone on with vaccine and where we are for the states for which I could find data. I will admit that I didn't spend all night trying to find every state on this call and their data with regards to race and ethnicity. These were the easiest three to find. Probably buried somewhere is data on other states, but these were the three that had a dashboard that was relatively identified. So historically speaking, as I mentioned, if you do studies of the Hispanic or Latinx community, what you will see is that compared to non-Hispanic whites, vaccines across the board, it pretty much doesn't matter which one you're talking about, MMR, varicella, hepatitis B, polio, vaccination rates are about 70%. of what they are in non-Hispanic whites. It's a little better in general than African Americans. As I said, worse than whites, worse than Asians. Florida, according to census data, this is from the 2010 census, so it's a little out of date, but should give us a rough guide because the 2020 census data is not available yet. 2010 census data, Florida, about 26% of people identify as Hispanic. Of those who have chosen to give Florida their ethnicity and have been vaccinated, they make up about 18% of those who've been vaccinated. So roughly 2/3. In Oregon, again, census data, about 12% identify as Hispanic, and they make up of those who've been vaccinated about 6.6%. So roughly about half. And in Rhode Island, oops, the number went missing. If I recall Rhode Island, it's about 8%. I'll double check that for everybody when I have a minute.
6%.
What's that?
It's 6%.
6%. Okay. So Rhode Island is winning because Rhode Island is 6% of people in Rhode Island identify as Hispanic. And of those who got vaccinated, 6% identify as Hispanic. So,
My apologies, Dr. Joseph. I was reading the other statistic. Yes, the percentage of Hispanic is missing. So we'll get back to everyone on that number.
Okay, so I'll
It
find
is
out what.
16%. 16%.
16%.
16. Mhm.
Okay, so 16% of Rhode Island residents identify as Hispanic, and they make up about 6% of those who got the vaccine. So again, roughly 2/3, 1/3. So what all this data says is that we're certainly not doing any better with the Hispanic community with vaccination than we do normally with respect to vaccines. And depending on the state, we're probably doing worse. So we're about 70% in Florida, we're about half in Oregon, and we're about 1/3, 40% in Rhode Island. So clearly, we are struggling to get the Hispanic community vaccinated with the COVID-19 vaccine. Why that is, I'm sure members of this group have plentiful opinions on. I have some thoughts of my own. I'd be happy to address some of those during the Q&A. If we could go to the next slide, please. I do want to address some common myths or difficulties in understanding how the vaccines work that I think represent at least some of the reasons why people don't get vaccinated. And to just dispel a couple of other things about vaccines in general with relation to their administration and how COVID works. So, a common myth is that you can get COVID from the vaccine. That is not true. And the reason it's not true is that the vaccine does not inject or provide the entire virus to the body. It provides only one part of the virus. And so the body cannot assemble the rest of it. And so getting the vaccine cannot give you COVID. Two things commonly happen. One is that we do not test people for COVID before we give them the vaccine. They happen to have it and get symptoms from it just as a coincidence. Also, the way the vaccine works is it must turn on the immune system. And when the immune system is turned on, you can have symptoms similar to that of getting COVID, but you are not actually infected with COVID. So you cannot get COVID from the vaccine. Myth number 2. Because the vaccine injects genetic material, the so-called RNA, it is possible that for the rest of your life, you will live with a bit of the COVID virus in your body. That is not possible. The reason it is not possible is that although the body contains machinery to go from DNA to RNA, humans do not have machinery to go in the other direction, from RNA to DNA. Therefore, the bit of virus injected into the body in the vaccine does not remain in the body. Third myth: the vaccine is dangerous if you have already had COVID. The answer is no. Although having already had COVID may lead you to have a stronger response to the vaccine, meaning more fever, more chills, more muscle aches, more pain at the site of the vaccination, the vaccine overall is not dangerous in those who've already had COVID, and there is no need to test people for COVID prior to administering the vaccine. Fourth myth: allergic reactions to the vaccine or its components are common. That is false. Although reactions of the allergic type to COVID vaccination are more common than in other vaccines, they still remain quite rare overall. There has been a media bias to present the rare reactions as common, but when examining the data, these reactions remain rare. All vaccines, regardless of type or method of delivery, can lead to anaphylactic shock, a severe reaction in which blood pressure drops dangerously low and the body develops a severe reaction to the vaccine. This is not unique to COVID vaccination and can occur with all types of vaccine, including that of the regular influenza vaccine received on an annual basis by many people on this call. Anaphylactic reaction is a life-threatening emergency, and this is why vaccine sites are required to be equipped with the ability to transport patients to a medical facility in a timely fashion. The final myth is that the vaccine prevents COVID transmission. We hope that it does, but this has not been studied. Therefore, this is why, after receipt of the vaccine, it is still recommended that individuals wear a mask, practice social distancing, and continue to perform hand hygiene, as individuals who have not received the vaccine may contract COVID from asymptomatic individuals who have received the vaccine. We believe from data from Israel that this occurs only infrequently, but remains possible. Therefore, elimination of COVID via vaccination will require vaccinating very large percentages of the United States population before the transmission chain can be broken. Thus, I must continue to insist that everybody please practice social distancing, mask wearing, and hand hygiene, and do not treat the vaccine as a panacea or cure-all with respect to preventing COVID or preventing oneself from acquiring COVID. Remember that the data from the trials shows 95% efficacy, not 100% efficacy. That means that in every 100 people, 5 of them will not have a response to the vaccine. We are discussing vaccinating hundreds of millions of people, which means hundreds of thousands of people will remain vulnerable to COVID and its severe complications. Therefore, careful guarding against relaxation of control measures is necessary. Eventually, it may be possible to eliminate COVID transmission completely. However, this is likely to take at least until the fall of next year. Thank you very much, everyone, for giving me this opportunity to provide an update on COVID-19 vaccine as it stands right now. I will like to end on a positive note, since that's a bit of a downer, that it may be until the fall, that 2 vaccine candidates one by Johnson & Johnson that I mentioned, and one by a company called Novavax, which will be used in England, are likely successful and coming down the pipeline. The other piece of data is that the Russian vaccine, about which there was a lot of doubt because data about it had not been published in the medical literature, was just released publicly, the data was, last week in The Lancet, a journal published in the United Kingdom, which shows that the Russian vaccine is also effective, something about which we had been quite dubious because of the lack of information due to the lack of transparency by the Russian government. The way in which the Russian vaccine works is a commonly studied vaccine technique, and because it's effective, probably means that other companies' vaccines, which are pursuing a similar type of delivery mechanism, and these would be available in the United States, will also be effective. These vaccines use the common cold virus to deliver a part of the COVID virus into the body to produce an immune reaction. And this is good news, as several drug companies in the United States are pursuing this technique. Because no vaccine company or manufacturer in the United States is capable of producing the 700 million doses that are necessary to vaccinate everyone twice, we are going to need at least 4 or 5 companies to vaccinate everybody in a timely fashion. Finally, I am sure that there will be questions about the new variant of the virus, or variants, I should say. With respect to the efficacy and effectiveness of the vaccine, we do not have a good answer to that data yet. It does seem that the vaccine is protective. The degree of protection I cannot answer for you at this time. Data on this question will be forthcoming in roughly 10 weeks' time from Israel. I cite Israel as a frequent example because they have vaccinated roughly 50% of their population. It is a small country. It's roughly the size of the state of New Jersey, and it has a socialized healthcare system. All individuals living in Israel must have health insurance through one of 4 government-run health management organizations. Therefore, it is much easier to do vaccine delivery in Israel. It's also easier there because the Israeli military is a requirement of service for being a citizen of the country, and people are more accustomed to being obedient to the government when it demands that people do things. And therefore, the culture of vaccine receipt in Israel is quite different than in the United States. Although they certainly have their share of vaccine deniers, people's trust in the government as a general rule in Israel is about 80 to 90% when it comes to healthcare topics. In the United States, that number is at about 30 to 50%, depending on the topic. And so they have a lot less battle there to convince people to be vaccinated than in the United States. But that's where we're getting a lot of our data, just so everybody understands, because they have vaccinated, as I said, about 50%. They're at about 30% of those people having had both vaccines. No other country in the world is over about 5% or 8% with both vaccines. So Israel's way ahead of everybody. The other reason I cite Israel is that in order to get the vaccine, they signed a data sharing agreement with Pfizer. So Pfizer gave them vaccine in kind for getting data about how it was working in the real world. That data is not available in the United States because Pfizer and Moderna did not sign those kinds of agreements with the federal government. So, as somebody mentioned in the chat, we are relying on the state governments to collect data about how the vaccine is working and who's getting it on their own. And of course, because every state has a different health commissioner and public health authorities, the data they are collecting, the timeliness of the data and the quality of the data is state and location specific. And sometimes that is why you will see, for example, discrepancies between the data from the New York City Department of Health and the New York State Department of Health. They don't always use the same form, same system for tracking, et cetera, et cetera. So you're going to see some different estimates. The federal government, unfortunately, is not tracking everything. I wish they were, but they're not. So I will turn it back over to you, Stephanie and Joanna, and we can take some questions, I guess.
Thank you, Dr. Joseph. So much information, so easy to understand, and very, very good information for all of us to make an educated decision about getting the vaccine, and also talk to our clients and partners and families about the vaccination. So we much appreciate you. So before we officially open it to the questions, I want to make sure that everybody please go to the top right of your screen, and you can click on the view and please select speaker view. That way you will be able to see not only Dr. Joseph when he answers the question, but whoever decides to turn on their screen and ask their questions. After the next slide, we're going to be turning off the PowerPoint and sharing all of the cameras. Next. We do have a few guidelines we want to make sure everybody follows and keeps in mind. We would like to see full participation. Always is encouraged in this type of meetings. So please make sure you ask your questions and your feedback. We are a little bit short of time. So for any type of feedback, please try to limit it to up to 30 seconds so we can really have enough time for questions and answers. Respect everyone's opinions. We would like for this to be a safe space for everyone to express their true feelings around the vaccine and ask questions without feeling ashamed. Today is about facts and science, so make sure you answer. It's a good time. Ask your questions. It's a good time for you to understand the true science that goes behind the vaccines. We try to keep a one mic at a time, so please wait your turn. So to avoid this, we ask you to please send a private message to Shay Martinez. You can either send her the question that you want me to ask to Dr. Joseph, or you can just tell Shay that you want to directly ask your question, and I will be calling your name as soon as it is your turn. So with that in mind, Stephanie, please go ahead and turn off the cameras. Thank you. All right, so we have a few questions already on the queue, so I'm going to get started, Dr. Joseph. Okay, the first question comes from Justin. He wants to know what happens if someone misses the second dose or takes the second dose late or becomes infected with COVID after the first dose and before the second. So what are the time frames on the second doses?
Yep. So Pfizer and Moderna have slightly different time frames for the first and second doses. Ideally, you should receive it on time. If received late, it's probably equally effective, although we're not sure of that, but we think that to be the case, as long as it's not months later. If one becomes infected with COVID in between, one can still receive the second dose. It should be received after complete resolution of the symptoms of the COVID infection.
Thank you. The next question, we receive it ahead of time. How long before you're fully immunized?
So full immunity happens approximately 10 to 14 days after receipt of the second dose. So a single dose of Pfizer and Moderna produces about 50 to 60% immunity. The second dose, 94 to 95%, and that occurs about 10 to 14 days after receiving both doses. It's not clear how long immunity will last for. We think probably at least a couple years. Beyond that, we don't know.
Thank you. The next question is, there seems to be a discrepancy with number of vaccines delivered to the states and the number of vaccines given. Do we know why there is such a discrepancy?
Yes. So if you look on the CDC website, I looked this morning, roughly 50 million vaccines have been delivered to the states, roughly 32 million have been given. So 20 million dose discrepancy. First, some of those doses are being held to give the second vaccine to people who have already received the first vaccine. Second, in many states, although not all, there are not enough individuals qualified or licensed to give the vaccine, to give it to everybody who wants it. So although vaccine has been delivered, there's nobody to administer it. Third, various weather events in the last few weeks have closed vaccine sites widely, not just in the last couple of days in the Northeast, which has prevented administration of the vaccine. And fourth, some states are holding parts of the vaccine back to target specific populations, say teachers, firemen, police officers, what have you, and so are giving it out as they can get to those groups of individuals.
Thank you. Next question. Is it true that after vaccines get thrown away, so after they thought, if a person misses their appointment, so what happens to those vaccines that are already thought, and at the end of the day, the clinic is closing?
Yeah. So it depends on which vaccine you're talking about, and it depends on where. So for some of the vaccine, it can go in the refrigerator till tomorrow. That's the Moderna vaccine. And it just has to be used up within a few days. Pfizer is more problematic. So most of the time, what they'll try to do is have a phone roster of people who are waiting. And so if somebody doesn't show up, they'll reach out to the next person in line. And people can read some funny stories about that happening in Seattle, where some doses got thawed accidentally. And so they called people at 2 a.m. to come get vaccinated if they wanted to. In Oregon, there was also a story, the vaccine was being transported on ice. The car got stuck in the snow. So the people transporting the vaccine literally got out of the car on the highway and started vaccinating people who were in other cars stuck in the snow on the highway. So that's generally how it works. If you have to, yes, the vaccine does get thrown away if there's nobody available to receive it at the end of the day. Ideally, they try not to do that, but that has happened a little bit.
Thank you. And just a quick follow-up on that question. How long those people have between thawing the Pfizer vaccine and administering, since you cannot put it on the map?
Yeah, that I don't remember off the top of my head. I'd have to look that up.
That's fine. Thank you. Next question. What if you're asymptomatic but don't know that you're infected and you get the first dose? Is it harmful?
It is not harmful. And the reason it is not harmful is that the way vaccines work, and I'll just quick aside here, we've studied how vaccines work for over 100 years now. So it's actually pretty well understood how a vaccine causes you to become immune to the virus or bacteria that it's being used for. So what happens with a vaccine is that it turns on your immune system in a very potent way. If your immune system is already on because it's fighting off an infection, even if you don't know it, the immune system doesn't double up, meaning you don't have this explosive immune response. because the body has mechanisms to actually prevent that from happening. And so having COVID, not knowing it, and getting vaccinated should not be dangerous. There are some extremely rare situations where it could be, but those are very unusual. So I would say very confidently, it's okay to be asymptomatic and receive the vaccine.
Thank you. We have a question from Giselle. She says that she recently read that the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is about 70% effective, but it has a high efficacy of preventing the transmission of COVID-19 from the vaccinated person to another person. Can you say more about this?
I can comment on the first part, not as much on the second, because I haven't had a chance to read the clinical trial yet. So, few things to be careful about. I don't know how well these terms will translate into Spanish, but I'll try. When you talk about vaccines, there are two things to know. One is the efficacy, and the other is the effectiveness. So the efficacy is what you get from the data in the clinical trial under controlled conditions. The effectiveness is what you get in the broad population when you vaccinate large numbers of people, because the people who choose to be in the trial are a very specific group of people. And they may be different than the people who get the vaccine in the general public. So that's just a word about terminology. So when the paper comes out and Johnson & Johnson says the vaccine is 70-some%, the word they are using is efficacy. We don't know how it's going to perform in the real world. Now, Johnson & Johnson primarily studied the vaccine to see if it would prevent severe COVID and death. So that's the 76% number they're referring to. I haven't looked at the study yet to see about the second piece of the question, which was how effectively does it prevent transmission of COVID from one person to another? I'll try to do that after the call ends, and I'll email Stephanie with an answer to that part of the question.
Thank you. Justin wants to know, with the development of new vaccines, are you able to mix them? For example, receive the Moderna vaccine and later receive another brand?
The ideal answer to that is no. The reason for that is that although Moderna and Pfizer's vaccines use identical basic technology, they are structured slightly differently. And so in theory, it's best to get one brand only. If for some reason that was not possible, at the very least, one probably should stick to the same type of vaccine. So Pfizer and Moderna are of one type, Johnson & Johnson a completely different type. So I certainly wouldn't mix Johnson & Johnson with Pfizer and Moderna. If by mistake you got Moderna and then Pfizer, or Pfizer and then Moderna, I don't think that's ideal because nobody's studied that, but I don't think it would be harmful.
Thank you. We have our first live question. So Daniel would like to ask you a question directly. Daniel, please unmute yourself.
Thank you, Joanna, and thank you, Doctor. That was a fantastic presentation. My question is: there are some reports of fake vaccines out there, right? There are few incidents still, but it's happening worldwide. Off the top of your head, do you know of any way in which somebody can identify a real vial versus a fake vial? You know, and where should it be reported? Directly to the police?
Yeah. So I have also, like yourself, heard reports of fake vaccines possibly being out there. In the United States, the way to advise your clients to avoid that is to refer them to the state public health department's website, which will have a list of vaccine sites that are giving the official COVID vaccine. Because the only source of COVID vaccine is the federal government distributing it to the states, which then designates sites. So if you use the state list of approved sites, you're certain to receive a vaccine. So I would encourage everybody to tell their clients, don't go to any site that's not on the state list. And if you have any doubts, contact the State Department of Health to get more information. If somebody has has received information from an individual or organization purporting to have the vaccine, the two people to contact are the local police department and tell them that you want to speak to the fraud division, and to contact the state health department and tell them that you want to speak to the inspector general. And that's usually the individual in charge of investigating complaints.
Thank you. That was a great question. Okay, so we have Rosie. She wants to know, why does the vaccine produce a stronger immune response than the COVID infection?
Yeah. So the reason for that is how the vaccine is made and given. When one gets COVID naturally, meaning by coming into contact with somebody who already has it, the amount of virus could be very, very small. And so your body may be able to fight that off without giving you any signs or symptoms of infection. When we give the vaccine, the amount of viral material, that RNA, is very, very concentrated. And that's why, as you may have heard, there was this question about overfilling the vials and how many doses were in a vial. And that's why there's so much discussion, because what you want to do when you give the vaccine is know exactly how much of that RNA you've given to somebody. And so when they draw up the vaccine into the syringe to give it, they are being very careful to give the exact amount that the drug company recommends. And that amount is many hundreds of times basically what you're exposed to generally in most situations. Now, just to be clear, if somebody actually has COVID infection, not just exposure to somebody who has COVID and fights the virus off very quickly, but truly has infection with COVID, meaning pieces of the virus inside their blood, their immune response and the immune response of somebody who receives the vaccine are essentially identical.
Thank you. Adolfo is asking, how about for people that rather wait and get herd immunity? If the majority of people get the virus, those that don't have immunity might not want to get vaccinated at that point.
Yeah. So the problem with waiting for herd immunity, and I'm going to use herd immunity in two ways here. So there's waiting for herd immunity as if the vaccine didn't exist, meaning let everybody get infected with COVID naturally. And once between 85 and 90% of Americans are infected naturally, there'll be enough immunity to stop transmission. The problem with that is that it will mean that roughly between 800,000 and 2 million more people will die of severe COVID. So that's why we shouldn't wait for the infection to get around and infect everybody, because we're looking at probably at least 1 million more people dying, maybe as much as 2 or 3 million, but probably at least 1 million more. Now, the question is, how long will it take to have herd immunity if some people are getting the infection and some people are getting the vaccine? And that's how I came up with the estimate of it'll be fall before we really have transmission under control, because we don't have enough vaccine, obviously, to give everybody vaccine right now. So natural infections acquired in the community will continue to occur, and some people will get their immunity that way. Immunity that you get from having had COVID-19 infection, we believe, lasts at least 9 months. We're not sure if it lasts longer, but it's probably about that long. And we know that from studies of nurses who were infected with COVID in March in England. And none of them, despite taking care of patients who've had COVID since, have gotten COVID. So we do know that people's immunity acquired naturally lasts for 9 months.
Great. We actually have a question from Facebook Live. They want to know if the vaccines protect against the new viruses
New
that are
strains,
coming
yes.
out. Strains, yeah.
We think so. They should provide some protection because the way the body is getting immunity with the current vaccines is to produce chemicals that look for that spike protein or that surface piece that goes into the lock. So they're looking for the key. So the new variants, it's exactly like a key you would put in a lock. If you look at a key, you know how it's etched at the bottom with a very specific pattern. So the new variant just has a slightly different pattern. The body should be able to still see that as overall an intruder and fight it off. It may not do it as well as it does against the exact variant you were vaccinated against. So that's why I can't give you an exact answer because we don't have the data, but we do believe it should provide some protection. The very preliminary data, 60 to 70% as opposed to 95%. But that's very preliminary.
Thank you. Alicia wants to know, she has heard that a lot of hesitation coming from young adults about the risks the vaccine has on future pregnancies. Could you explain some of the facts that are known about this?
Yeah. There were very few pregnant patients in the studies done so far. Now, the United States has said, since there's no way for the RNA in the vaccine to become part of your DNA, and therefore no way for it to become part of the fetus or unborn child's DNA, the vaccine should be eminently safe and should be given to people who are pregnant. That's been the United States position. The European governments have an organization similar to the FDA that approves drugs and medicines. They have said, since we don't have any data, don't give it to pregnant people. Not that it's not safe, let's be clear. They've said, we don't know, so let's not do it. They've not said it's safe, they've not said it's not safe, they've said we don't know, so don't. Now, COVID-19 infection in pregnancy typically is no more or less dangerous than COVID-19 infection if a woman was not pregnant of that same age. It can cause problems, however. So if you qualify to receive a vaccine for another reason, say an immune disease or having had cancer in the past or whatever it is, being a priority group, and you happen to be pregnant, I think that's a discussion you need to have with your primary care doctor or OBGYN and make a decision based on that discussion. I think hopefully in the next few months, we'll have more data to answer this question, because certainly we will have vaccinated some pregnant women, both because we will have vaccinated some people who did not realize they were pregnant when they got the vaccine, and because some people who are pregnant will just choose to take the vaccine. And that should give us some more answers. But the theory is sound that it should be safe.
Thank you. Katrina wants to know, does everyone to get the shot have to be on insurance or Medicaid?
I have to look into that more. I believe it is state specific about how the vaccine is getting paid for. But I will email Stephanie when we are finished with some more answers to that question.
Thank you. She also wants to know what is or are the main ingredients in the vaccines?
Sure. So all vaccines basically consist of three things. The active ingredient, which is some chemical or compound to turn on the immune system. In this case, that's that RNA that's in that lipid particle. A vehicle, which is basically some liquid that makes it possible to inject the vaccine, because remember, you have to get it through the needle into the muscle. So you have to have some water or fat or liquid oil, whatever it is, to move the particles into the body. And then you have to have some kind of preservative so that the vaccine does not break down quickly, and also protects it against, you have to remember, how do you give the vaccine? Well, the syringe is made of plastic and the needle is a piece of metal. So you need preservatives in there to keep the vaccine from interacting with the plastic and the metal in the syringe or the glass in the vial, et cetera, et cetera. So those are the three main components of all vaccines. And there is nothing different about this vaccine than any other in the past in those three components. The exact specifics are not worth getting into because they're very specific about every vaccine. The main thing people worry about is that in some older vaccines, there were some preservatives that used either aluminum or mercury. And people have tried to suggest that those preservatives were linked to a risk of autism and birth defects. They are not. Let's be clear about that. That link has been debunked many, many times. It's not true. The metal preservatives do not increase your risk of birth defects or autism. And we have, for the most part, stopped using them just to be extra sure of that. Even though we are sure that they don't, we've stopped using them. So the preservatives in the COVID vaccine should be entirely safe. And the vehicle is inert. It has no effect on the immune system. So it too should be completely safe.
Thank you. I want to remind everybody that if you want to ask the question directly to Dr. Joseph, is highly encouraged. We want to hear from you. So you can send it to Shay. Please do not send it to me in private that you want to speak, so we can get this more interactive. In the meantime, I'm going to do a follow-up question on this vaccine ingredients. Would you give us some tips on how to talk to anti-vaxxers when it comes to all vaccines, but this one in specific?
Certainly. The most important thing is twofold. One, to understand what kind of anti-vaxxer you're dealing with, and two, to understand what their concern is. A percentage of anti-vaxxers are unconvincible and are there to argue with you and cause a debate, particularly in public. To those individuals, the response is calm and collected answering and a simple representation of the facts that the vaccines are safe, and say nothing more because you will be unable to convince them. And continuing to debate them or provide them a platform simply produces a debate you do not want to have and that you will not be able to successfully win. And in fact, you will usually lose because they will come with all kinds of materials, quote unquote, to convince people. So best not to engage and simply say, this is a forum or a place for those who believe that the vaccines are safe. You do not hold those views. This is not the place. For those people who have legitimate questions, because they in general are of the belief that the vaccines are unsafe, or that vaccines in general are problematic, the proper technique to use is what is called motivational interviewing. This technique relies on asking the person you are speaking with to explain their concerns to you so that you can actually understand what is the reasoning behind their decision making. For most people, the reasoning behind their decision making is scientifically flawed. And so calmly presenting the facts, once you understand the reasoning for their hesitancy around the vaccine or their attitude, is usually sufficient to change their mind. So for example, someone might come and say, my niece or nephew, cousin, received the vaccine, and a few days later, such and such thing happened. Therefore, I think vaccines are not safe. So the answer is to calmly explore what it is that happened. Oh, they got this kind of vaccine, such and such a thing happened a few days later. Well, what was that? And then use science to explain that there actually is no connection between the vaccine and whatever happened later, or that you don't know if there's a connection and they need to speak to the pediatrician, whomever it is. So that's generally the way to approach this problem. The other thing I will say is there are some people who are just conspiracy theorists who will never accept that the government has your interests at heart. Those people too are not persuadable. And it is usually not worth debating them because again, you will not ever change their opinion and they just cause distraction. So I would avoid those types of discussions if you can.
Thank you. Chicky wants to know, there's been talk there's a little bit of leftovers in the vials after the correct doses is given. Is it possible to combine those leftovers and create more doses?
Yes, it is possible to do that. One needs to follow the manufacturer instructions for doing so. Each company has released guidance on exactly how the site should handle its syringes and vials in order to do that. And the companies are also making some changes to their equipment to further make that easier to deal with. And those should be available probably in about a month.
Thank you. Rosa is asking, do you think there will be a new COVID vaccine out to vaccinate against new variants, kind of like the flu vaccine?
So let me take this and about 3 other questions I saw in the chat on similar topics all together. I don't know if somebody's going to target the variant. We're not there yet. It'll probably be about a year before somebody tries to make such a vaccine. Number 2, this is related and somebody asked in the chat, do I know if we're going to need booster vaccines, say in a couple of years? We don't know. The coronaviruses that circulate just normally, you're immune to for about 2 or 3 years after getting infected. SARS, people were immune for up to 10 or 15 years after. So we don't know yet. Probably at some point people will need a booster, but when, I'm not sure. And what that booster will be, whether it'll be 1 shot or 2, or whether it'll matter if you had COVID in the past or not, don't know yet.
Thank you. We also have a couple questions about children. So when do you think children will be able to get vaccinated? Why is it not safe yet to do it? So just talk about a little bit more about the younger ones.
So 2 things. The clinical trials did not study children. So it's not that it's unsafe to vaccinate a child. Again, it's a situation of we don't know if it's safe to vaccinate a child, so we're not doing it. That's part 1. The reason the clinical trials didn't include children is that thankfully, and this is very strange, just like no other virus that works like this, it's very unusual, COVID does not seem to harm children for the most part, not nearly the way it does adults. Fatalities in children with COVID are nearly non-existent. Now, they've happened and they're tragic that they have, but it's virtually a non-entity. Compared to the flu, for example. Flu kills the elderly, which COVID does very well also, but flu kills a lot of children. COVID, which is often compared to the flu, does not. Don't ask me to explain why, I don't think we know. But because it's not a serious problem in children, they didn't study it. The other reason is, and this has come into question, but it was the standard thinking when they started the trials, was that children don't transmit COVID very well. Now, that may not actually be true, but that was what they thought when they designed the trials. So they didn't try to vaccinate the children. I think probably we will vaccinate kids, and it'll probably be kids older than 12 in the fall, once we have some more data and have enough vaccine. Because kids don't get severe COVID and the vaccine is designed to prevent severe COVID, it really doesn't make sense to vaccinate kids before we vaccinate, say, everybody who's over 65 or even everybody who's over 50.
Okay. What about, 3-year-olds, 5-year-olds, anybody under 12?
Going to be a long time. Probably at least a year, maybe more.
So I have a follow-up on that because I have a 3-year-old. My son uses a mask every day when he goes to daycare, all day. So if we're not expecting them to get vaccinated and the time it's going to take us to do herd immunity, he's going to be wearing that mask for the next school year.
Probably.
Again.
Yeah, probably.
Okay,
Thankfully,
so
masks are not harmful, except to be annoying.
he actually really likes them, so he does not leave the car without it. So
yeah,
we have
Spider-Man,
a few minutes.
Batman, Superman, whatever he likes.
We have a few minutes to get to 3:30. We ask you to please stay if you're able to. Remember, we have an evaluation poll right at the end, but we would like to allow around 5-10 minutes for feedback, questions, comments, open mic. We do not have anybody else in the waiting list for asking questions, so feel free to unmute yourself and tell us how you're feeling about this town hall. If you have any more questions, anything you would like to share with the group, please go ahead and do that.
If I can just add quickly, I dropped my email address in the chat earlier. So if you have a particularly complicated question or if it involves a personal situation, and you didn't want to put it in the open forum, feel free to email me. Obviously, please don't put protected health information in there because that's my personal email. But if you have those kinds of situations, I'll be happy to try to answer particular questions, or if you want me to call you, whatever, happy to do that. Just send me a line in the email.
Thank you, Dr. Joseph. So before you unmute yourself, please use the reaction button in the bottom. And you can raise your hand so I can keep track of somebody who would like to speak. Unless somebody's ready, mics are open. Esther, would you like to say something, Mr. Mariela?
No, only I said that's good. So I put the hands up. So no, the only maybe since you asked me, doctor, 2 questions. Is Pfizer or Astra the one they said that protect to transmit the virus? It wasn't there. I mean, the comments that some doctor mentions an epidemiology. I don't know, it was Pfizer or it was AstraZeneca, who the vaccine help not transmitting the virus.
We think the Pfizer one may prevent transmission. We're not sure about that.
Okay.
AstraZeneca, no data yet.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else would like to unmute themselves? Rosie?
I have one question. Well, I don't know, I just want your opinion if a federal plan would actually help getting vaccines into arms, or are we too late?
Let me not say things I shouldn't on a recording and stick to saying that.
Well, like I know you mentioned earlier that everyone has different state health departments, and there's no centralized guidance. They just release guidance, but they don't, it's not like mandates.
Yeah.
But
I think some more coordination from CDC and the federal government would certainly help. There's some legal issues around that, because of how the government handles healthcare. But I think people in the administration could speak more strongly about how to do this than they have. Let me say that.
This is Esther Chamarella again. I'm sorry. In Chicago, the issue is we are working with the city, the state, the county, and it's no coordination. I think you agree, because people thinking that this is an epidemic, so it's a public health issue. So the states need to coordinate. I mean, the state, not everybody need to coordinate in each state, because the issue is people's happen now in Chicago. They have a website that you can call. People in the community, in the low income community, white and color people, don't have that facility. So we're pushing in the community to have more vaccination in the school, in the library. So more at the grassroots level than say go to the pharmacy here. So because that creates lack of coordination, who in a pandemic is totally different than other health issues. So that's my comment.
Thank you. Justin?
Yeah, so one question I've had, are there people who shouldn't receive the vaccine right now? I know we discussed children, but that's kind of another question that people have mentioned here and there, people with autoimmune disorders or things like that. Are there any like specific groups that shouldn't receive the vaccine?
The simplest answer to that question is no. There's not a broad sweeping group of people that I'm aware of that shouldn't receive the vaccine. There probably are some specific situations. So two things to say about that. One is it's possible to be allergic to the vehicle or to the preservatives. So individuals who've had reactions to prior vaccines of the allergic type should talk to their physician before receiving this one to make sure that there's nothing in the vehicle or in the preservatives to which they would be allergic, because those tend to be common across more than one type of vaccine. I can't think of any well, there's a couple of illnesses that do preclude the vaccine, but they're all very rare. And they are basically, people can have no immune system from birth, or have only parts of their immune system that works from some genetic diseases. And in those people, they shouldn't receive the vaccine because they won't respond to it. But those people would be aware that they have those conditions, and they know that they, as a general rule, don't get vaccinated. So can't think of any sort of generic person. You know, diabetes, for example, COPD, HIV, those as a general rule don't preclude the vaccine.
Thank you. Stephanie?
Dr. Joseph, so I did have one question that I wanted to sort of ask on behalf of all of our partners, which is what recommendations would you have for all of them who are community-based organizations, they're not government, to help increase some of these vaccination rates with the control that they do have?
Yeah. So I think this is very tied to, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was Esther who was pointing this out, that you have to, and this is why y'all are community-based organizations in the first place, of course, is you have to get out in the grassroots and do two things. One is that technology is a huge barrier here because the states are using the internet and the telephone as the way to obtain appointments. There's no place I know of that's doing walk-ins of any type right now because they don't want the lines and the headache of people who might have COVID being gathered together, which I understand, but it's creating a huge difficulty in registering people. Not to mention that even for the people who have internet access, the sites are often down or unavailable because there's more demand than supply. But setting that aside, I think community groups have to figure out how to get out there with some laptops, you know, or cell phones and go bang on doors. That's number one. Number two, that's for people who obviously want to get vaccinated. I think the other thing that has to be done is to try to understand really in depth what information is necessary to convert those 46% that I showed in that graph from the Pew Research study to wanting to receive the vaccine. in general, and this is data outside of COVID vaccines, the reasons people don't want to receive vaccines primarily are based on mistrust and misinformation. And so what has to be explored is what is that mistrust and misinformation, and how can we combat that? I'm more familiar with that in the African American community, where most of that mistrust comes from the federal government using African Americans in experimental studies without their consent.
Yeah.
Whether that's a similar barrier in the Hispanic community, I don't know. That's not my area of expertise. I imagine people on this call know that better than me. But I think that's what you have to explore is, where is the mistrust coming from? What are the common themes of misinformation? And then developing literature and educational materials at the appropriate reading level, et cetera, to combat that. Because clearly that data shows that there's a large percentage of people who you might be able to convert, with the right information. So I think those are probably the biggest two. I think the other thing is that once we have a bit more vaccine, and it's not quite so tightly controlled, the distribution of it, because that will happen, by the way. We're going to get more, and the vaccine supply will loosen up. Community organizations have to be ready to figure out how to roll it out into, that's the right word, sort of siloed or ghettoed areas, that have been closed off from receiving the vaccine so far. And I think that's a major role, community organizations on this call could play, for communities who haven't had good uptake of the vaccine. For example, in New Jersey, we have a huge problem. A large amount of the vaccine is being given at the Meadowlands, which is the football stadium. The football stadium is not accessible unless you have a vehicle. So not a good system. So once we have a little more vaccine, if you're a community organization that it's at the local, and I'm just going to make up an example here, local Boys and Girls Club, that's actually in the community, I would have a list of doctors, people who are willing to administer vaccine, so that once it rolls out, you can start to do that.
Yeah, good point, Doctor. Tomorrow we have a press conference here in Chicago, because the issue is, again, the teachers don't want to go to school. The idea that we propose is why we don't have the school has nurses. They can partner with community clinic, the Federal Qualified Health Center, and vaccinate the parents there, the teacher, and all the employees, or work with a librarian in the school. So tomorrow will be big thing, because there's some friction between the city, not with the county, not with the state, but in the city about not paying attention what happened in the Hispanic community.
Yeah.
Thank you. Rosa, I think you wanted to share something. You had your hand raised. Okay, well, Rosa? Okay, while we wait for Rosa, we have one question from Debbie, actually two questions. The first question is, what if someone has autoimmune disease or cancer? Should they get vaccinated? And also, if a person never received a vaccine since they were a child, do you recommend they get vaccinated?
Yeah. So for people who have autoimmune diseases, who have cancer currently, that's a discussion really to have with your personal physician. I don't want to make any sort of blanket statements. What I will say is that in general, you can be safely vaccinated. It's not a live virus vaccine. It's only a piece of the virus. So like I said, it can't cause you to have the COVID-19 infection. So it should be safe. It's just not well studied, because again, they didn't put those kinds of people in the studies. So that's really a personal discussion with the physician, but in theory, it should be safe. The immune system basically continues to work throughout an individual's life, provided that they don't have certain diseases that kill off the immune system. And so not having had a vaccine since being a child is really not a problem. Most Americans go about 20 years between vaccines. So they finish getting their vaccines to go off to college and don't receive another vaccine until they're, say, in their 50s. So that's really even 30 years, and that's no problem. Or you might go about 10 years in between when you're getting your tetanus shot. So that's perfectly fine if it's been a very long time since you got a vaccine to get a different one, many years later.
Thank you. So I see one more hand raised. Justin?
Yeah, I just had a question about regarding information, and particularly patient information. So when I went to get my vaccine, I had to fill out a form, basic information. They just asked my name, address, phone number. They didn't ask for anything like a social security number, but I know for a lot of people in the Latino community, and particularly undocumented households, that kind of trust or mistrust of the government and where's my information going to? So do you know offhand, like what information the CDC actually gathers about individual people? Or is that information even given from the state to the CDC? Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So because the effort is being rolled out by the individual health departments, what they're collecting is somewhat specific to each individual health department. For sure, what they want to collect is information about the person's address and telephone number and email, ideally, because they're trying to keep track of people in the event that there are problems with the vaccine, that they can get in touch with them. So for sure, they're collecting that. So obviously, people who don't want to give out that information, that is very difficult. As far as other identifying information, like a person's race or sex, gender, age, it's very state specific. The states, I have to look at what exactly the CDC is requiring. I don't know that off the top of my head, the states to report. But it's also a little confusing because if you look at the CDC dashboard that has the data, it's incomplete compared to what some of the states are collecting. And I don't know if that's because the states are not giving the CDC that data or the CDC hasn't asked for that data. It's a little confusing because the CDC website, at least the last time I looked, for example, doesn't have any race ethnicity data on it. But many of the states clearly have that data because they're publicly reporting it. And so I'm not sure what the interplay is there. I can try to find that out though.
Thank you. So I don't think we have any more questions or follow-up, and we're a little bit over time. So Stephanie, can you pull up the PowerPoint one more time? We want to thank everybody for being here. Before I launch that poll, Stephanie, next, please. So the presentation slides and recording will be emailed to all the attendees, and you can also see it on our Facebook website. So please make sure you follow us on Facebook and all of our social media so you can get information about this town hall and any other future events that we might be having. Also join our listserv. If you have any questions, Dr. Joseph's already sent his email on the chat, or you are more than free to email us and we will make sure Dr. Joseph gets the information so you can get your answers. We want to invite you to our next webinar next week, Tuesday the 9th. It's our session 3 of Raising Voices, and we're going to be focusing on human trafficking, past, present, and current challenges. We're going to make sure to add the link on the chat and on Facebook as well. We're going to be launching our PODER en SALUD website in the next couple weeks. So stay tuned so you can get this and all the information related to Covet and all of our partners and affiliates work while we are working together as a coalition to help Latinos increase their capacity to respond against COVID-19. And finally, we are going to be launching the evaluation poll. Please take a few minutes to complete it, and that will be it. After that, I want to thank one more time from the NASTA team to Dr. Joseph for so much information, great responses. I have learned a lot, and I hope all of you have enjoyed spending this time here to learn. Okay,
Thank you very
so
much for having me. It was my pleasure.
Thank you. I'm going to be launching the poll. It's going to be open for a couple of minutes since there are a few questions, and feel free to disconnect from the call once you are done with the poll. Again, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Josephs. And we've actually had quite some activity on the Facebook. So just so you know, there's also other folks that will be receiving this information afterwards as well, and just other parts of the community, which is very important.
Beautiful.
And as always,
Yep, and if you're done with your poll and you still want to make a comment or give us some feedback about what you have learned or what you plan on implementing, please do so while we wait for everybody to answer the poll.
Thank you. Everything was beautiful. Good job. Congratulations.
Thank you, Ms. Yamarella.
Joanna, you become a good communicator.
Thank you. Good luck on your conference tomorrow. And I hope you really get, some help for the families. I can see how, being able to send your child to school is so important as a parent. I definitely want to keep sending my child to school, but until we got vaccinated, it was really hard for us to, make that decision on a daily basis, looking at our town's cases and things like that, because we were not vaccinated. And even though if my son does not get sick, he could bring it home. And my husband is high risk. So I can understand how so many families are on that same situation in Chicago. I look forward to hear updates from this resolution that you were going to get tomorrow.
Thank you.
And we encourage everybody to do their own town halls. The toolkit that was sent out that the CDC developed for community-based organizations has slides in English and Spanish that you can use to conduct your own local town halls with your communities. So we encourage you all to do the same and have as many as necessary so that our community has the information that they need to make the right choice.
Good.
Thank
Good,
you, everyone.
All right, I think there's around 3 people left on the poll. All right, one more person answering.
We aim for 100%.
Always.
No opinion left behind.
All right, we have reached 100%. So thank you very much, everybody. And we'll see you next time. Hope to see you next week on our webinar.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.